Welcome to Gold Derby's film documentary panel. I'm Gold Derby senior editor Denton Davidson here with Frida director Carla Gutierrez. I am Celine Dion director Irene Taylor and Sugarcane co-director Emily Kassie. Thank you all for being here today and congratulations on such great films. And I'm looking at a panel made up of 3 female directors, and this wasn't something we set out to do purposely, but it just so happens that 3 of the best documentaries are by women this year. And I'm curious to ask you, do you feel like documentary as a genre is more welcoming to female directors, or is it just a different pathway in? Because it's unusual for us to have 3 female documentaries on a panel. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that, and maybe I'll start with Carla.
I think just the nature of documentaries, the history of documentaries, there's always been more space for people that just just do their own thing and make things happen. It's not so much, getting access from the powers that are, up there, like with fiction. So I think it attracts a lot of female producers and directors that just start a film, even if they don't have funding at some point. So yeah, I mean, I think, and me starting a career in editor, there was definitely as an editor, there were definitely more access points as a woman. I would have to say that I don't think the industry or the community is still, very accessible and welcoming to BIPOC producers and directors. I've seen a lot less of that in my long career as an editor. But yeah, I mean, I think that it is a space where you see a lot more women as producers and directors.
And Irene, you've been in this business nearly 2 decades now. Has it felt like things have shifted for you in the past 15 to 20 years?
Well, there's certainly been shifts. I've tried to keep my head down, to be honest. I don't think about my womanness necessarily as informing my filmmaking. I just think of my humanity as informing my filmmaking. I also find I start tripping over words if I speak as a woman. But certainly in this film with Celine, I think it's undeniable a certain relatability that we both had. We are within just a few years of each other in terms of our age. We both have 3 sons. We just had these little things in common, but they ran pretty deep. And in making my previous films, I was filmmaker slash daughter, filmmaker slash mother. I've made very personal films about my family, and I also think sometimes gender can play a role in your subject's willingness to talk to you. And I don't mean to say as a woman it was easier to talk to me, but I think sometimes it is helpful if sometimes there's a gender difference between, I think about a film I made recently about survivors of childhood sexual abuse in the Boy Scouts called Leave No Trace. And a couple of the men in that film specifically pulled me aside to say, I felt like I could talk to you because I feel some anxiety around sharing such embarrassing aspects of myself. And I thought that was really interesting because, of course, I don't know what it's like to be a man who's listening, but I'm grateful that I am a woman, but I think it's really my humanity and the specific connection with each subject of each film that really is what makes the difference.
And Emily, how about for you? Was it a natural transition for you to go from investigative journalism into documentaries? Was it just a natural passion that you followed?
Yeah, I made docs in the context of newsrooms. So there were parameters to what you could do artistically, but in terms of using visual storytelling to bring to life, real stories and news events from a kind of human perspective was what I was doing. So the biggest difference was the size of the task. Usually in visual journalism and in short documentary in newsrooms, you have, maybe a month, max, maybe a few months. In this film, we were given, I mean, we gave ourselves, because no one was paying us, but we gave ourselves 3 years to make something, and to be able to live in a community for 3 years, you get to a level of depth and connection and trust that you couldn't possibly access by dropping in for a shorter period of time. And I also think when the parameters of journalism are removed and you can make art, and you can think about poetry and lyricism and visual language and rhythm and pacing, it transforms the work, and you're able to create cinema. And I think that cinema has a very unique power to access us on a deep emotional level that can actually change our minds much more than informational pieces can. So I think that was kind of the biggest thing for me. And I think also the collaborative nature of feature filmmaking. Like you in the newsroom, sometimes you have to be a one person show. You have to shoot and edit and all of these things. And in this case, I got to work with not only Julian, my directing partner, but I had a producing partner in Kellen Quinn. I had a shooting partner in Christopher Lamarca. We had 2 amazing editors in Maya Daisy Hawk and Nathan Panwar. We had so many people who touched this film, who brought their extraordinary talents that made it so much better. And I just want to say, to Irene's point, I do agree that, you know, we operate from a place of, you know, as filmmakers, as human beings. But I will say that it's exciting for me to get to know and be surrounded by incredible women who I so greatly admire, like Irene and like Carla. Carla can attest to the fact that I rigorously pursued her for years of wanting to work with her. And, you know, there are so many women who have led the way in this industry, and it's really incredible to be amongst them.
I just want to add that, you know, there is that relationship that we have with our subjects, what attracts us to the stories that we want to tell, and also the richness of our perspective and how we bring that into the story. There is also the aspect of, you know, of the industry, and it is true that there's still, you know, there's still problems with access in terms of like who's getting most of the funding to be able to make this, you know, these films, and you know, and maybe not as much as maybe with fiction in terms of our numbers, but I think that there is definitely, you know, a glass ceiling that is cracked, but it needs to be completely, you know, taken away. So yeah.
I'm curious to hear from each of you. Is there a documentary that you just love that feels like the gold standard in some way? Like something that you either grew up and fell in love with, or you've seen recently that is just an exceptional piece of documentary filmmaking that you look up to this day? Irene, how about you? Is there a documentary or even a filmmaker that really inspired you?
You know, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that was not a film, but it was it's an approach that I learned from the so-called godfathers of cinema verite in the early 60s. Once we had the advent of sync sound, you really saw a lot of these combination filmmakers where the director would often run sound and the DP, of course, would be running the camera. And that is how Nick Midwig and I made this film. And I think rather than looking towards another film that we were trying to emulate, we were really trying to find that dance between director and director of photography. Because with Celine, we really didn't want to outnumber her. And already 2-to-1 is outnumbering someone. And we were in such quiet spaces with her for a year that, I mean, truly quiet spaces, that we did not want to have any excess. So I really think that the way we approach our subjects with a camera, whatever we can do to just make it feel like we're all here, we all have a role, you know, the subject is her own role, right? And so that has really been my guiding light with this film, was really I would run sound, and I was that much more dialed in to the tonality of what I heard in her voice. And so that's really what I was thinking about more than film titles or other people. And like I said, I'd never made a film about a celebrity before. So I really went out of my way not to watch celebrity films because I just didn't want to feel it at all. I wanted to just operate from a real gut place.
And Emily, how about you? Is there one film or filmmaker that you really looked up to?
There are so many. I want to point to just a couple. You know, I think that I was really inspired by Julia Reichardt, who did this film called Growing Up Female. And it is a film that she made almost 40 years ago at a time that was kind of unprecedented, where she followed women of different races and classes in America, and was inside their homes, was interviewing their husbands. And this was a time where women didn't have a lot of options in terms of where they could work and what they could do. And I just think that she was a trailblazer. And that was so deeply inspiring to me. You know, I think there are incredible investigative filmmakers like Laura Poitras, who is again bringing together, you know, cinema and hard kind of journalism and truth telling. But I also want to point to, in terms of Sugarcane, that I had a pretty massive education in Indigenous storytelling and cinema and art. And Julian and I spent a lot of time watching, you know, Powwow Highway or Smoke Signals, or Taika Waititi's films like Boy and Hunt for the Wilder People. And that, I just think for every film, there's kind of a, you know, an incredible arsenal of work that has been done that we, in particular with this film, wanted to be in conversation with and think really thoughtfully about how we could be in conversation with Indigenous filmmakers and also be in refutation of the colonial legacy of documentary. Arguably the first documentary was Nanook of the North, which was about, you know, the Inuit people up in Canada, and was a kind of racist and very kind of patronizing portrayal of them. And it was so important to us that the way we approached this film was a refutation of that, and that really required understanding the artists and voices that we were, you know, adding this film to their legacy.
And Carla, how about you?
Gosh, I think that I'm very much inspired by good filmmaking, good storytelling. I mean, I think what, you know, something that Emily mentioned is the power of film to really show kind of like the world through the eyes of somebody very specific. And there is so much responsibility that we have for our characters, our stories. But at the same time, I think that, you know, that I think that getting really, you know, very, very intimate, and also like just choosing what we want to focus on. You know, we're never going to present, you know, the entire life of somebody. We're never going to present, you know, a character's like whole being. We're making choices in terms of what we want to tell with this film, what we want to focus on. With Frida, it was very much this, you know, a sense of like expressing your true, honest voice, even if it's complicated, even if it's, you know, it's just, even if you're difficult, and the complexities of that experience and your emotions, that's cathartic. That's a good thing. That was the theme that we were going for in Frida, especially for women and non-binary people. So I'm always looking for, you know, for films that inspire, that good storytelling that can be told in so many different ways. I mean, for Frida specifically, I was very much inspired by Sena, by Asit Kapadia, because it really brought to life, you know, a different time through archival footage, but that was always seen through a very, very personal, you know, perspective. And you felt that you were like, you know, kind of like living through that time at that moment, that it felt very, you know, very present, very of the moment. And we were dealing with Frida, with a story that happened in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s in Mexico. But I wanted the audience to really feel as if we were just seeing her be alive, like really, really capture her spirit and feel her spirit, like be very, very present, as if you were listening from her right now as a friend, right? But you know, I mean, there are films like I was lucky enough to be able to work on this film with David Teague, who edited Cutie and the Boxer, and that's, you know, a film that just through verite and just the way that the film like feels the layers of people, and the complexity of like this intimate experience of a couple, it's just like a beautiful told story. So, or The Thin Blue Line, for example, which like really uses, you know, interviews in an amazing way. So for me, it's just kind of like central to be inspired by watching a lot of documentaries all the time. But also, you know, just having a good sense of what the theme of the film is. What do you want to say? And then in a way, style, approach, and format kind of like has to lift that up and you know, and not be the center. Like I don't believe that you should start with style. You should start with like what is the heart of the story that you want to tell, and then everything else needs to support that. So I'm always looking at good storytelling in films to give me inspiration of how to do that.
I think so often when we, you know, are calling upon other films we may have seen, it's like calling on your ancestors, you know, you're sort of reaching back to try to duplicate or replicate that emotion you felt. And I know when I was making this film about Celine, you know, I was so surprised by her every day. Every day I was with her, she surprised me. And so I wanted to bring that element in, but I also just wanted to make sure that I had all of these elegant variables that I knew were fitting with who she was. And I wasn't trying to compete with her music because I wasn't really even a fan of her music, but I was trying to find a score, for example, and I tried to think of previous scores that I've heard because I was just constantly trying to put my audience in an emotional spot, you know. And back to the women conversation, I mean, we are all women here talking with you today, but I don't think we're more emotional. But I know that with my female colleagues and female friends, I can talk about those things with abandon and not feel like they're womanly or embarrassing. It's like, I think, you know, what Carla just said, like starting with this intuitive, emotional place, is very compelling, you know. And I think, you know, what is so powerful about Emily's story is that there's so much emotion tied up in it that is, of course, historic. It is diabolically evil, and yet you're trying to find something that makes it watchable so that you want to stay with the story. And that really is the power of good characters, you know, people who make you want to like hang on. And I think all of our films are like very different in so many ways, but I think they're all really driven by I feel like the intuition of the directors in them.
And they're all inspiring the next generation as well. And I want to thank all of you for joining our documentary film panel today. And remind everyone watching, if you haven't yet, see Frida by Carla Gutierrez, I Am Celine Dion by Irene Taylor, and Sugarcane by Emily Kassie and Julian Brave Noise Cat. Really incredible films, and best to all of you this upcoming awards season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.